When I go out and I talk about adventures in recovery, I share a story. It was a study, actually, that was done back in the 60s or 70s. And it was the rat park study. In the study, they took a single rat and they put it in a cage by itself with two samples of water. One was water laced with heroin or cocaine, and the other sample was just regular water. And what they found was 100% of the time, this rat left by itself in that environment would go for the drug-laced water and die. Same study, larger cage, more rats. It's a rat park. Rat wheels, rat ramps, things for rats to do. Same two samples of water, multiple rats. And what they found was nearly 100% of the time, those rats would go for the regular water and live. And so when I go out and I talk about AIR and adventures in recovery in this sober active community, I joke that we're building our own rat park, but in essence, that's what this is. From an early age, I knew that I enjoyed substances. You know, it got me outside of myself. I feel like I was always uncomfortable in my own skin. And the first time I tried alcohol, it made me feel like I could breathe, you know. I equate it now to walking into the woods. Now I walk into the woods and I can breathe. But back then, it felt like I couldn't connect with other people without a drink and feel normal. And so alcohol made me feel normal. It allowed me to talk to people freely. It allowed me to feel normal in social situations. But with that, I started to depend on it to feel normal in daily life. And, you know, by the time I was 18, I became a daily drinker. And so I joined the military at the age of 20, realizing, you know, I might have a drinking problem. And so I joined the military thinking that the military would help me stop drinking. And in fact, I was joining one of the largest fraternities in the world. And in many ways, the military taught me how to drink. And so, you know, my alcoholism progressed in the military. I was a good soldier, you know. I made rank quickly. I was physically fit. I did my job well. But at night and on the weekends, I would find myself drinking almost all day. And so met a girl when I was stationed up in Alaska, and I promised myself that when I went home after this 4-year tour, that I would stop what I was doing with the drinking. And I got home and I quickly realized that I couldn't stop, and I didn't know how to stop. And so my drinking progressed. And eventually, you know, that woman that I had met up in Alaska and was engaged to, she gave me an ultimatum. She said, "You either stop drinking or I'm leaving." And at the time, I didn't feel like I was an alcoholic, and I didn't know how to live my life without a drink. And so I continued to drink. You know, I agreed to go and see a counselor, and I went once, and it felt like it was attacking. It felt like the counselor was kind of attacking me. And so I just decided not to go back, and my drinking just progressed after that. After she left, I quickly started to lose things. You know, I lost the relationship. I was on the verge of losing the house. And I became a daily drinker, almost round-the-clock drinker. And luckily for me, I was saved. I was still in the military. I was in the National Guard, and I was saved by a deployment to Afghanistan. And I went away for a year, and I promised myself when I returned from that deployment that it would not look the same. My drinking, I didn't agree to stop drinking completely, but I told myself my drinking was going to look different. And so I got back from Afghanistan, and with undiagnosed PTSD, and my drinking was worse than ever. You know, my plan was to stick to beer when I got home, but I couldn't sleep. I was on edge. I was hypervigilant. And so I turned to alcohol, you know, the one thing that always made me feel normal. But instead of beer, I, you know, was using vodka. And anytime I would wake up in the middle of the night in a panic, I would take a couple shots and it would make me feel normal. And I'd go back to sleep or I'd continue drinking. And eventually it was a round the clock thing. You know, my drinking was bad before I left for Afghanistan, but when I got back, it was a totally different animal. And again, I didn't know how to stop. And so eventually I had an alcohol withdrawal seizure at my National Guard unit, and the cat was out of the bag. You know, Sergeant Smith has a drinking problem. And that was the beginning of me trying to get sober. And the first few years was really, really ugly. I decided I wanted to get sober on my own. You know, a lot of counselors and family, they were pushing me towards AA, and I was very resistant. I'd push right back. And I told myself I was going to do it my way. You know, if there was one thing that the military taught me, it was if you just try harder, you can succeed in whatever your endeavor may be. And I applied that to my alcoholism, and it just didn't work. I would go to a detox and come back and I try harder. And it was frustrating. And I got stuck in that, you know, revolving door of hospitals, treatment centers, detoxes. And I just couldn't find recovery. And, you know, a large part of that was due to me pushing back, you know, and not being willing to connect with other people. And so after a DWI, I landed in a veterans halfway house in Rochester. And it was, you know, the best thing that could ever happen to me, you know. At this point, I had lost everything. I'd lost my house, my job, my dog, my truck. It was like a bad country music song. And, you know, I got to that veterans halfway house and I was just done. I was done with myself. I was done feeling the way I was feeling. And, you know, I was just definitely done drinking. And I didn't know how to stop. And I admitted that I didn't know how to stop. And I sought help. And at that veterans halfway house, I found help. You know, there was a group of guys there who were right around my age that were serious about their recovery. And they kind of took me under their wing. And they said, listen, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go to the gym during the day. We're going to do hikes. We're going to go on bike rides. But at night, we're going to go to 12-step meetings. We're going to go to AA. And you're going to get yourself a sponsor and you're going to work the steps. And, you know, at the time, I was desperate. You know, they call it the desperation of the dying. And I was dying for sure. And so I was willing to try anything. And I tried AA. And I got a sponsor and I worked the steps. And surprisingly, I started to find recovery, you know. And it was at that Veterans Halfway House where my recovery journey really began. And when I left that Veterans Halfway House, I decided I wanted to go to Army Ranger School. It was something I always wanted to do. And I never was able to go because my drinking always got in the way. And so I had my unit sign me up for Ranger School. And I shipped out, you know, shortly after I left that halfway house. And I got to Ranger School. And for those of you that don't know, Army Ranger School is one of the toughest military schools you can go to. And, you know, after going through the process of recovery and having those friends that kind of showed me the path, when I got to Ranger School, it really wasn't hard for me, you know. It was physically hard and mentally challenging, but, you know, after going through that process of recovery and going through what I had gone through, I knew that I could go through anything. And I've met a lot of people in recovery, And I have to say that they are some of the strongest people I've ever met. I've met a lot of tough dudes in the military, and hands down, people in recovery are tougher. They've been through a lot, and they found a way out. But I found my way out through connecting with other people, and finally letting my guard down, and letting the process work for me. And so, when I got out of Ranger School, I knew if I stood a chance at staying sober, I needed to continue to do the things that I was doing at that halfway house. And so I started scheduling events. I would go back and I'd pick the guys up from the halfway house, and I'd work them out every morning at 6 a.m., 6 days a week. And I found that it was keeping me sober. And so I kept on doing it. And I'd bring them out on hikes on the weekends and kayaking trips. And eventually I started scheduling these events to Facebook, and people within the recovery community asked, can we come out and join? And I said, yes, of course. And it turned into a sober active recovery movement in Rochester. I ended up starting a nonprofit called Recovery Fitness. It's a recovery community organization that focuses on health and wellness and introduces people in recovery and their family members to exciting, fun, sober events. And that was one thing. And I thought that my life was over when I was getting sober. I didn't equate the word sober with fun. You would never hear me saying it in the same sentence, for sure. And what I've found since that time is that recovery is a wild ride, man. And I've had more fun doing this kind of work and enjoying my recovery with people that I care about than I'd ever would have, in that former life. So fast forward to now, 2021, I started AIR, Adventures in Recovery, for CASA-Trinity. It's a sober active community, recovery community organization where we introduce people in recovery and their families to health and wellness options. We show them that recovery is possible, that there's hope, and that recovery is a whole lot of fun. And our only requirement to participate in any of our physical events is 48 hours of continuous sobriety. And what's cool with that is people who never would have made it through the front door without the aid of a loved one can bring that loved one. And, we introduce them to nature. And it's wild watching somebody with that 48 hours out on a trail with somebody with 20 years. And, the conversation may start with, dogs or Sunday football or the forest, but it always comes back to recovery and how that person with 20 years did it. And that person with 48 hours, their ears open up and their guard is let down, and in the process of recovery starts to seep into them, and they can pick and choose what they like about other people's recoveries and apply it to their own. And so, I've been blessed to be able to do what I love for a living, to be able to share my passion for fitness and the outdoors with people that I truly care about. I couldn't have planned this. Dave Bryson says, all my plans have failed, and it's gotten me here, and I couldn't be more grateful. So my recovery journey has not been linear. I don't think anyone's is. I've had my ups and downs. I've hit roadblocks and obstacles. And I try to walk through them as gracefully as I can. I suffer with PTSD, and my PTSD wants me to isolate. I feel comfortable isolating. And so I need to force myself to connect with other people. My recovery is all about connection and in service. And so I force myself to connect with other individuals through not just the work that I do, but in sharing my passions with others outside of work. Um, you know, I have had relapses. I got sober. You know, first I entered recovery, I'd say, about 13 years ago, and those first 3 years were rocky. Um, and what kept me going was seeing other people and that there was hope for recovery. Um, and after those 3 years, I did find sobriety. I found recovery. Um, but as I got well, I got those things back. I got the girlfriend back. I got the house back. I got the truck back. I got the dog back. And all of a sudden, I forgot what got me well. And so I started pulling away from AA. Stopped working the steps and applying them to my life. And kind of just tried to stay sober on my own. And I found within 6 months of trying to do that, I found myself drinking again. And it was tough. It was tough to dust myself off and get back on the horse. But after living that life in recovery, I knew that it was possible. And so I just walked through the fear, is what we say. Our tagline at Adventures in Recovery is walk through fear. And I've largely applied that to my life in recovery. If there's things that I'm afraid of that I know are going to be good for me in the long run, I know I need to walk through that fear. And so that's what I do with any challenge or obstacle. I came into recovery with all these self-limiting beliefs. And, I found people within this community that showed me that I'm better than I think I am. I'm stronger than I think I am. A lot of times when I go out and talk about adventures in recovery, I tell a story. And I call it the Adirondack Mountain story. And it happened probably 9 years ago. I would take people up to the Adirondacks for a sober New Year's hiking trip, and we would hike Whiteface Mountain. It's a 10-mile trip, 5 miles up, 5 miles down. And I had posted the event to Facebook, and a woman reached out to me, and she said, I don't have the 48-hour sobriety requirement. I think I'll have 36 hours. And I'm really struggling. I'm in a dark place. I'm not sure if I'm an alcoholic, but I think I need help. And I told her, just show up. Just show up. And so she met us up in the Adirondacks. And that night, I was doing our gear checks to make sure everyone was good the next day. And she laid out her gear, and she had North Face boots. She had a Patagonia jacket. She had really great winter gloves. She even had ski goggles. And I'm looking at her gear, and I'm thinking to myself, this girl's done this before. She'll be great tomorrow. She'll be good to go. And we got on the trail. We got about half mile in, and she was not good to go. She said, I'm not strong enough. I'm not good enough. This is impossible. I want to go back to the car where I'm comfortable. And I said, well, how about you get to the mile mark and see how you feel? And she gave it some thought, and she said, okay. And she got to the mile mark, and it was the same deal. I'm not strong enough. I'm not good enough. This is impossible. I don't want to ruin your guys' good time. I want to go back to the car where I'm comfortable. And I said, well, how about the halfway point? 2.5 miles. You think you can make it to the 2.5 mile mark? And she said, okay, I'm going to try. And so we get to the 2.5 mile mark, and before she can even start with the line of those self-limiting beliefs, it was so cool to watch the other people on this trip. And there was about 10 of us. They all rallied around this woman, and they started to cross-load all of her heavy gear, her water bottles, and everything in there that was weighing her down. And eventually somebody ended up taking her backpack and they got her to the top of the mountain. And I tell this story because isn't that recovery? You know, we come into it thinking we're not good enough, we're not strong enough, we're probably not going to make it. And we have these people that rally around us and show us that recovery is possible, that we're better than we think we are, we're stronger than we think we are, and they love us until we can love ourselves. And they get us to the top of the mountain, whatever that mountain may be. And that's not just recovery, that's life. And the coolest thing about this story is that woman is still sober. That was 9 years ago, and she's still sober. She found sobriety on that mountaintop. And so when I talk about AIR and adventures in recovery and introducing people to a new way of life, there's no story that's better than this mountain story. It just describes the work that we do at AIR. And it describes recovery. It really does. And so I love that story. You know, it gets me choked up when I tell it even still, and I've told it 1,000 times. But the cool thing is too, with this kind of work that we do, we find people all the time that come into this. And, you know, they say, I can't walk 3 miles, or I'm not an artist, I'm not a musician. But all of a sudden, you know, with this community, they find that they are these things. You know, in our addiction, you know, we were limited to the belief that we weren't good enough, that we were just addicts. And in recovery, we find that we are athletes, we're musicians, we're artists, we're creative, we're productive members of society. With the work that we do with Adventures in Recovery, a large part of the work that we do is shattering the stigma involved with addiction and recovery. You know, when I go out and talk about Adventures in Recovery, I talk about the old billboards with the faces of meth. People driving down the expressway, and you see these billboards with people in active addiction. And, you know, in some of the communities that we serve, the ideology is once an addict, always an addict. You know, and they look at these billboards and they say, well, not in my family, not in my community, when it's in your community. But we're here to show those people and to shift the public's perception. And we're here to show them that recovery is possible, that there's hope in recovery, that there's fun in recovery, that we are productive members of society. Anytime anyone asks about AIR or Adventures in Recovery, I always direct them to the Facebook page and look at the pictures. Look at the pictures and you can see people reconnecting with family members out on a trail. You know, you see women who maybe lost their kids 2 years ago to the disease of addiction, and they are getting their kids back, and they're exploring waterfalls, and they're going on kayaking trips, and they're climbing mountains together, doing things that they never thought that they'd be doing. And that's recovery, you know. In my personal recovery, I never imagined, you know, this life. It's unimaginable. I'm blessed. And I get to meet people every day that are walking this path, that help me to stay on this path. We do all have a unique story. And the message I would convey to anyone who's out there that feels like they are alone is that you are never alone. There's people out there that have walked this path that are willing to reach their hand back and help you to get out of that pit that we were in, you know. When I go out and I talk about Adventures in Recovery, I share a story. There was a study, actually, that was done back in the 60s or 70s. And it was the rat park study. And in the study, they took a single rat and they put it in a cage by itself with 2 samples of water. One was water laced with heroin or cocaine, and the other sample was just regular water. And what they found was 100% of the time, this rat left by itself in that environment would go for the drug-laced water and die. Same study, larger cage, more rats. It's a rat park. rat wheels, rat ramps, things for rats to do. Same 2 samples of water, multiple rats. And what they found was nearly 100% of the time, those rats would go for the regular water and live. And so when I go out and I talk about AIR and Adventures in Recovery in this sober active community, I joke that we're building our own rat park, but in essence, that's what this is. You know, it's a human park, and what better place to do it than in the southern tier of New York? And so that's what we've done. We've created this human park for individuals to connect. And for me, recovery is all about connection. And it was something that was lacking in my life. Like I said before, my PTSD and my alcoholism wanted me isolated. And so my recovery wants me connected. And so I choose recovery. I choose to walk through that fear, that uncomfortability of meeting new people and exploring new places, and walk through it and connect with people that care about me and that I care about. And in doing that, I found recovery.